Chapter 1. Embers of War. The night was thick with smoke and shadow. The salty tang of the sea mingled with the metallic sting of blood in the air. The docks of Blackfang Port, once bustling with the sounds of merchants, fishermen, and dockhands, now echoed with the cries of the dying and the crackle of burning timber. Orc war barges, their grotesque figures carved into twisted, snarling faces, loomed at the piers like predators feeding on a carcass. From a weathered watchtower, two figures stood cloaked in darkness. The taller of the two, broad-shouldered and imposing, folded his arms behind his back as his gaze surveyed the carnage below. His pale fur shimmered faintly under the moonlight, revealing a lion-like mane tied back into a neat braid. His sharp, golden eyes reflected the inferno that consumed the once proud port. "Do you disapprove of our methods, Lord Otair?" came the guttural voice of the second figure. The speaker was Kelskull, warlord of the Black Claw Horde. Standing nearly 15 feet tall, his towering form was a canvas of scarred green skin, adorned with jagged tattoos. A monstrous skull, bleached white and cracked, served as his left shoulder guard. In his right hand he gripped a massive battle axe, etched with crude runes that pulsed with sickly crimson light. His breath was hot and rancid as it steamed through sharp tusks. Oser did not turn his gaze from the massacre below. "I'm no stranger to war, Kelskull," he said, voice smooth and calm. The orc bared his tusks in a twisted grin. "Then you know. The only way to win war is to burn your enemy's roots." He turned the axe in his hands, the runes flaring. "This town is just the beginning. We will march inland, break their cities, and take the riches for ourselves." The faintest shift of Oser's expression was the only warning. His hand shot out, faster than the eye could follow, grasping Kelskull's throat. The orc's grin turned to shock as claws pierced his thick skin. "I did not agree to that," Oser said softly. The axe clattered to the dock as the orc's knees buckled. Blood gushed over Oser's wrist, staining the dock beneath them. "You promised," Kelskull croaked. "I promised you Kattan cities to loot, not a kingdom to rule," Oser said. His grip tightened. Kelskull's body spasmed once, then went limp. Oser released him, watching the warlord collapse to the ground with a heavy thud. The light in the axe's runes dimmed, as if mourning its master's death. Oser bent to retrieve the weapon, inspecting the crude craftsmanship. "Now," he said to the empty air, "let's find someone who understands the nature of our arrangement." The shadows behind him shifted, and a figure emerged. Jakoda Panthran, clad in black, bowed slightly. "The orcs follow strength, Lord Oser. You just proved yours. They'll obey." "See to it," Oser said, handing her the axe. "And burn the ships when they're done. I want no trail leading back to us." Jakoda gave a predator's smile. "As you command." Far from the burning port, the moon shone coldly over the whispering bamboo forest. The night air was cool here, crisp with the scent of damp earth and fresh foliage. The ground trembled slightly as heavy footfalls disturbed the silence. Jailee Lynxian crouched behind a moss-covered rock, heart racing. Her ears twitched at the guttural grunts of her pursuers. The orcs had picked up her trail hours ago, but she'd led them into her domain. This forest had been her training ground since childhood, and now it would serve as her trap. The orcs came crashing through the underbrush, their heavy boots splintering bamboo stalks like brittle twigs. Their eyes glinted yellow in the dim light, weapons ready. Jailee counted 7, too many for a direct confrontation. One of the orcs paused, sniffing the air. "She's close," he growled. Jailee suppressed a smirk. Of course she was. She closed her eyes and extended a hand toward the ground. Mana stirred beneath her palm, thrumming through the soil into the bamboo roots. The whisper of her power spread through the network of roots, awakening the dormant trap. The orcs advanced into the clearing. Jailee exhaled. The ground beneath their feet collapsed. The two leading orcs plummeted into the pit she'd prepared earlier, impaling themselves on sharp bamboo stakes. The others recoiled in surprise. "She's a witch!" one bellowed. Jailee leaped from her hiding spot and sprinted toward the far end of the clearing. She brushed her hands against bamboo trunks as she passed, activating more mana threads. Fine wires, strung between the stalks, shimmered for an instant before going taut. The next three orcs hit the wires at full speed. The strands sliced through armor and flesh with surgical precision. The final two orcs slowed, hesitating. Jailee skidded to a halt beside the broken head of an ancient statue, once a guardian of the forest temple. She leaned casually against the mossy surface and drew her short sword. "Come on," she called softly. "What's the matter? Afraid of a little lynx?" The larger of the two orcs snarled and charged. Jailee dropped into a crouch, waited until he was close, then lunged forward. Her hand brushed his exposed thigh. Mana flowed from her fingers into his flesh. The orc stumbled, legs trembling. His companion faltered as well, gripping his sword with growing desperation. Jailee stood, watching them with clinical detachment. The veins beneath their skin darkened, spreading black like poisoned roots. The larger orc collapsed to one knee, growling in confusion. "What did you do?" he gasped. Jailee twirled her sword. "Just gave the roots a taste of your blood. They don't like intruders." She stepped closer, blade glinting. "Why are the orcs here? Who promised you Kattan cities?" The orc bared his teeth but said nothing. Jailee's free hand brushed his forehead. Mana surged, coiling through his mind. His eyes glazed. "Answer me." The orc's voice came hollow and mechanical. "A Kattan warlord promised us, Jagar, more after." Jailee's breath caught. "A Kattan warlord?" She pressed harder. "Who?" The orc's lips moved, but only one word escaped before his eyes rolled back. "Oser." Jailee froze. Lord Oser was dead. He died in the final days of the war. His name was etched in the Book of the Fallen. Unless... The orc's body convulsed and collapsed. The roots beneath his skin burst through his flesh, wrapping around his limbs and dragging him into the earth. Jailee sheathed her blade and stepped back. If Oser lived, the war hadn't ended. It had just begun. High atop Blackclaw Ridge, Lord Shin of the Tigeran clan lowered his spyglass and cursed softly. The orc scout party below moved with practiced efficiency, something unheard of since the war ended. Shin's fur bristled as dread coiled in his chest. "Sir?" Baku, his lieutenant, crouched beside him. "Orcs," Shin said grimly. "Scouts. And where there are scouts..." Baku squinted into the valley below, his breath caught. "There's an army," he whispered. Shin nodded. "We need to warn Commander Aileen. The orcs didn't come here alone." He glanced toward the distant horizon where smoke still rose from Blackfang Port. "And if the rumors are true," Shin muttered, "the dead have returned to lead them."